For the 2 or so years of play Total Warhammer 2, the majority of the time the Beastmen have sat at the bottom rung of the totem pole, with campaign mechanics actively hampering the amount of fun you could have. Well, if there was any fun to begin with. Their roster performed atrociously, and being saddled with an equally bad horde system, actively paying out of the ass for units that were meant to be chaff but couldn't replenish properly, a tech tree that actively disincentivized you for upgrading, and have I said how atrocious their roster was? Honestly, this DLC is a horde representation of balance, lacks the quality and fun of any other DLC, and is more than twice the price of the Warriors of Chaos. It's the reason I'm canonically reviewing this after the Grim in the Grave. As it stands, this is the worst DLC, or was the worst DLC. Thanks to a blessing from CA, the Beastmen got a well-needed and well-deserved faction overhaul. But did the update really refresh the migraine that the Beastmen were originally? Yeah, it did. The Beastmen rehaul was a dramatic increase in quality from their original state. They went from being by far the worst and most boring campaign to easily one of the most enjoyable. Currently, Warhammer 3 is out, and while I would love to review this on Immortal Empires, I don't imagine that will be coming out for a while. So for the time being, I'm going to be reviewing this on Total Warhammer 2. On the campaign map, Beastmen play as a semi-horde faction. They still have to recruit from buildings built onto the specific lord, but something that made them so much more enjoyable to play was the addition of herd stones. Once you beat any settlement fight, whether that's provincial capitals or just minor settlements, there's now an additional option to raise a herd stone. Once you raise a herd stone, it gives you devastation. You can get more devastation by raising nearby settlements. All of that devastation correlates to a ritual that would convert the devastation into Marks of Ruination, which is another addition. Marks of Ruination can unlock higher capacity on recruitment. Oh yeah, recruitment is no longer saddled by your poor income. Units are completely free, only needing to spend dread to increase their unit capacity. Higher tier unit capacity is unlocked through having more Marks of Ruination. It sounds like a lot to handle, but it flows pretty well without too much thought. Constructing herd stones, then raising nearby settlements to complete a ritual that lets you unlock higher tier unit capacity. The army system of capacity works a lot like Tomb Kings, and just like Tomb Kings, to restrict you from making 2 or 3 spam armies of free units, you have to either hit certain ruination goals or spend 1500 dread to increase your army capacity. Now I keep bringing up dread, and it's just a secondary currency gained from winning battles, raising settlements, and completing missions. You can spend it on, like said previously, increasing unit caps, increasing army capacity, confederating with other legendary lords, and permanent campaign buffs. Sadly, they still suffer from the resettlement problem that the Warriors of Chaos did, as well as having to defend their herdstone, because if a herdstone is destroyed, all that destruction you just gained goes with it. They can still suffer from the lack of a free encampment, but here it's a little more excusable, since a Beastman encampment still gives them a chance to ambush if an enemy walks near, and the Beastmen love a good ambush. I guess on that note, I should go over to how their roster performs. Originally, they had a horrible roster that firstly costed too much, it didn't have proper durability for their damage output, casualties would barely be replenished after fights, had a screamingly low leadership, was barely supported by the technology tree, and lacked varied composition due to the horde mechanic. All of this in my eyes was fixed. Now that the units are technically free in campaign, you're no longer paying out of the ass for chaff that now replenishes at a reasonable rate. Their leadership is still somewhat low, but only on the lowest tiers of infantry. Even then, Beastmen now deal enough damage for them to work as a blitz army, dealing lots of damage very quickly, and then having certain higher tier units like Bestigors keep you in the fight. The tech tree actively supports units you'll use, as well as giving solid buffs on the campaign map, and because the units are free, it lets you freely spend your favor on upgrading buildings to unlock more varied units. Before in the campaign map, only having Cygors or Razor Gores really seemed worth it. Nowadays, using Gore Herds, Chariots, Razor Gores, Centaurs, Jabberslice, Minotaurs, the whole roster seems much more appropriate for their playstyle of having loads of decently damaging low armored infantry backed up by packs of fast moving flankers or high damage dealing health pool monstrous units. As fun as the reworked roster melds with the brand new mechanics, I can't help but feel contained to my herdstones, ping-ponging around the local province to make sure stray armies don't raise my herdstone and render the past couple turns useless. Yes, the campaign is a lot of fun, and they fixed many of the problems, including being able to raise and then encamp, but I find the lords included in the pack relatively uninteresting in both the battle and campaign aspects. Not to mention that I've heard the word gore about 30 times, but that's more in Games Workshop than CA. It also doesn't help that the visual distinction between many of the early tier infantry units is negligible at best, and many of the models to me look uninteresting. In conclusion, this DLC is a difficult recommendation from me, as for $18.99 there are multiple Lord packs and even other race packs that would be more worth the money. In the end, I can still give it a recommendation, but with a simple caveat. The campaign tends to keep you stuck in certain areas, confused on how to progress because settlements keep being repopulated by your enemies, especially being on the doorstep of some of the most powerful members of the Order Tide. All my rants aside, Call of the Beastmen now shows how much CA has improved at creating fun campaign mechanics and balancing their roster properly, and hopefully it's a trend they keep into the future. I went out of order a bit, but the next review will be on the King and the Warlord. I'll see you then.